You're listening to Three Makes Baby, a podcast about fertility, family, and genetics. I'm Jana Repnow, a fertility counselor and author of Three Makes Baby. Welcome to the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Three Makes Baby podcast. I'm here with Hannah today, and Hannah is donor conceived, or she was donor conceived. And I want to learn a little bit more about your story, Hannah. So tell me, just kind of give me a background about, how you found the podcast first, if you don't mind, and then tell me your story.
Yeah, sure. So I found the podcast because I am one of many siblings from the same donor, and it was shared within our group. We kind of have a chat group together that some former members have been on the podcast. And so I thought, when I think about my story and the way that I want it to unfold as I go further, trying to take a little bit of ownership back into my story, and part of that is then storytelling and letting it be heard.
Yeah, so true. The power of storytelling just cannot be underestimated. So it's great to hear from you. And as always, these conversations are not planned out. They're not scripted.
Right.
I'm meeting you for the first time, and listeners are hearing this meeting. And so I like it to be as natural and authentic as possible. So, they get to kind of hear and listen along as we talk, and I get to hear your perspective and your experience. So I'm glad you found the podcast and, are able to share it, hopefully, so others know that there are other people out there with stories that are similar to theirs. And though your experiences are different, and that's, I think, what's really important too, to convey. So let's talk. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your story. And I know there's some uniqueness in it. So.
Sure. So I've only known that I was donor conceived for a year now. And as I, answer questions or talk about different components of this, albeit short journey thus far, I have to say that it can't necessarily be disassociated with the story that my parents began. And for them, they chose to keep this component a secret from me and everyone who knew them. And in today's world, that may not be people's typical choice. I don't know that. I don't know the data on that. But at least 25 odd years ago, it just wasn't disclosed widely. And especially for them, there was a lot of shame around it. For them. And so, I'll probably more talk about just my experience with that, because I don't know all of their ups and downs and details. I think there's lots of things that people are considering as they look at alternative choices for starting a family. And it's not just about having a baby. It's, will my family accept this part of it? Should we do adoption versus this? There's so many options.
Now let me ask you, you identify it as shame. Was that something you were able to identify right away, that's what your parents were experiencing?
Yeah.
Tell me how did you recognize that?
So I was not told by my parents. I found out through another family member who did it in a very hurtful, meaning to hurt.
Oh no.
And that's never the way that someone should find out. But
I'm so sorry. That is something I have talked about that can happen. And it's
and so my parents have a big age gap between them, which is why they were struggling to start a family. And my father, so I have that age difference, and then for him, he already had the family, right? So second marriage.
Okay.
Thought that we, as a couple, they were like, we know what we want. Probably hold off on the kids for a while, no problem. But then biologically, maybe things start changing, relationship starts changing, and now you're thinking, okay, I would like to grow this love. I would like to have children. And then it's well, how do we do that? And so being older, and I mean, males can use their sperm for forever. It's crazy. But both my mom had issues, and also my dad had a vasectomy forever ago. So like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you
Yeah.
reverse that?
Yeah, it's a long time,
Um,
so it's harder to
yeah.
reverse. Um, yeah, and so did they have to end up using double donation or?
I'm not sure. I just know they tried like 3 different times. So it was not only was the so not only is there sometimes shame around people who cannot conceive,
Mm-hmm.
there's also this moment of like, well, how far do we go with it? How many times do we try?
Mm-hmm.
Um, are When do we exhaust this option, and then when do we turn to the next one, like our
Yeah.
plan B and C and D? So they had tried with the same, I believe it was the same donor 3 different times, and then I was conceived on the third time.
Okay. Well, so yeah, so by I should have specified by double donation, I meant both a sperm donor and an egg donor.
No, so
Okay.
my mom was able to use her
She was. Okay.
eggs. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. I mean, there was like surgery stuff beforehand. There's a lot of things that went into it because
Mm-hmm.
she had scarring
Okay.
from, I'm not sure what, but she was older in her
Okay.
upper 30s. So
Okay.
um, it's it's kind of crazy to think about, like, as women have ascended into higher and higher levels of quote unquote workplace,
Mm-hmm.
and are choosing to have children later, our biology has not caught up with that.
That's
Our
right. It's
bodies
so true.
still want to bear children at 16, at
Uh-huh.
19,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
we may not be ready for that or want that until like our 40s. But
That's right.
that those things don't line up still.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it feels like you have to choose.
Yeah. Yeah. Our biology hasn't caught up to the social changes
Mm-mm.
at all. And a lot of
No.
women don't realize that their reproductive years are much younger than they thought, that they hear stories of women
Right.
having babies at an older age and don't realize that that's sometimes with a lot of help. So,
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point, is that for women or people who identify as women are able to have or conceive, and that was a difficulty that's not necessarily shared. And so when you hear these stories of like, oh yeah, she had a baby at 45, at
mm-hmm.
35, like,
Exactly.
you don't know what that story was behind there. And then people's like,
Exactly.
cool, I can wait, no problem. Not to
Mm-hmm.
mention that my egg count just dropped off exponentially when I hit
Af
30.
Exactly, yeah, that's right, and they're not hearing the whole story. Yeah.
Um,
So they were able to, conceive you, and did you get a lot of these details after the fact, like in the past year?
yes.
Okay, wow. So
Yeah.
she ended up telling you quite a bit of detail.
Yeah. I mean, once the gate was open,
Mhm.
um, it was like, all right, anything you want to know, like anything.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for ever keeping this. This was not our intention. And maybe that's a good point too, is that my parents always wanted to tell me together.
Okay.
But since my dad is older, he has dementia,
Okay.
and that started about 10 years ago. And
Mm.
so as he's known me less and less, that moment that was supposed to happen, where they would both sit me down and tell me this thing, just never really showed up, because
Never
my dad
happened.
doesn't have
Mhm.
moments of clarity that you know that's going to happen.
Mhm.
So it just
Got
got
it.
harder and harder, and then got further and further pushed back. And honestly, like, because I know now in my 20s, like, it doesn't it doesn't affect me in the way of like my childhood is ruined.
Mhm.
Like, no, it's now a part of my story. In this past year, I've been trying to take what I knew about my 18 years of quote unquote childhood or whatever, and then overlay it, or maybe insert this extra brick into the foundation, that
Mhm.
is to say that, oh, I didn't know this little piece of my core biology.
Mhm.
um, and then say like, well, okay, what things are growing out of that not knowing? And there's not much, honestly.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I'm not angry, or and I wasn't for the second. Like, as soon as I was like told this, I like looked at my mom, and that just complete like angst, and like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And then I was like, but it doesn't matter. And then to that family member, I'm turning back and being like, I I lied, but I was like, I did know. And it doesn't
Mm.
matter.
Mm.
And because I didn't want my mom to lose face in that
Mm.
moment.
Okay.
And I got this really big moment of clarity where I was like, oh, it doesn't even matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I will make that choice right now.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of been a good foundation and that I've built upon too this past year of like, some things do matter in the ways that it's really, really important. Like my dad's still my dad, my mom's still my mom. I'm not bitter or anything like that. It's just, how do I tell these things differently now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, a couple things I want
Sure.
to talk to. One is that this idea that they wanted to tell and intended to tell, but never did. That's really common.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It happens a lot. And because it's so easy to get caught up with parenting and just kind of go on with life as normal, that then sitting down to have this moment of telling,
Right.
it's easy to postpone and postpone and postpone. They go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
now it's gotten
And then it
awkward.
gets
Now it's
bigger and bigger and
us.
bigger.
Exactly. So that's why when people say, when should I tell? I say, well, start right away. And they go, why? I say, well, it's just easier on you as a family if you just start right
Mm-hmm.
away. You just start
Mm-hmm.
incorporating it in your dialogue. It takes practice. So a lot of times, people don't know how to talk about it because they've never used words like this, or they've never had the social narrative or the script to say before. They just don't know what to say. So it's learning a new way of describing family.
But that's something that a lot of couples are reconciling from the beginning, right? Is saying, this is how I'm defining family. And that does not change when the child is there. If you're defining your family and how it's growing by incorporating a sperm donor, nothing changes from that once the child is there. So, like you said, like the narrative that you started 9 months ago before the child was even there, like just continue it.
Yeah. It's just that some people they haven't fully accepted that new narrative.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so they don't know. Um, and so rather than rather than talk about it, they tuck it away,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, keep internalizing and externalizing the old narrative of this child is biologically related to both of us. And if we don't
Yeah.
speak about it, then that will be assumed by everyone. And if that's assumed, that's the narrative we are living.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what, the difference is when there isn't acceptance of that narrative over time, then you use the old narrative. And that for you is not the accurate narrative.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you aren't biologically both your children, and you kind of have to, like you're sorting through what's relevant, what's not relevant, what impacts you, what doesn't impact you. And that can
Mm-hmm.
change, from over an entire lifespan. And that, even if a
Yeah.
child knew from the time they were young, they might have feelings about it. They might feel fine about it and then have different feelings when they're older. A life event might change their development. We're always growing and learning. We're always uncovering
Mm.
new layers of ourselves. And so that's kind of I guess the interesting
Yeah.
part is so dynamic and ever changing. And so you have the right to change your mind.
Right.
You have the right to change your mind in 2 years and go, you know what, feel differently now. And that's okay. You're figuring
Absolutely.
it out. So
Yeah, definitely. And having that grace for yourself, like I might feel very differently when I choose to have children. I might feel very differently, if something pops up. Like the good thing about having, 70 plus whatever siblings is that as we get older, we will be growing up together. So as things pop up, we have this database to tap back into and say like, hey, my left knee's been acting up. Anyone else? And, one
mhm.
third of us say, yeah. Well, I already got mine replaced about 5 years ago. And I'm
Oh my
like, wow,
gosh,
shit,
right?
I'm probably going to have to go do that. Like, that's kind
Yeah,
of incredible.
absolutely. You don't have to spend years doing detective work trying to figure out what's going on with you, health,
Right. I
what
mean,
could be
pretty
the
quickly, I'm
solution.
like,
Yeah.
that's the donor, or no, that's my other side.
Yeah, that's kind of the fun part is like piecing it all together in a way. I say fun at first. It's maybe isn't fun for people, and maybe it's confusing. It would be naturally confusing, but
Mm-hmm.
for those that don't have that information from the beginning and do have to do a little bit more work,
Mm-hmm.
in adulthood, that I guess it's all how we can. There, at times it can be a pain, and at times it might be a little bit kind of fascinating. So again, both
Yeah.
positive and negative feelings. There's no one way to feel. It just is. It's just what it is.
Yeah.
Everyone's different. And yeah, for you saying it doesn't matter, that is your that's your truth, your
Exactly.
experience, that this isn't changing who you are. And that, while it was this secret that seemed like it could cause a big disruption, you're choosing for it not to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at least in this,
Yeah.
especially the way it was presented to you, almost weaponized. And I could see why you would
Mm-hmm.
be like defend against that and go like, hey, you try to use this as a weapon against me, and I'm not going to let you do that. And
Right.
so,
Right. Yeah. And yeah. So I think two of the things that I've struggled the most with is one that, well, this is just my personality, is I just want to be unique. I want to be the first one to do things. I don't want, like, just have whatever that ENTJ
mhm,
Scorpio like energy where I'm like,
mhm.
I'm the only one that probably thought of that. Meanwhile, like everyone's thought of a lollipop. But when I then saw like, oh, I have all these like siblings, which I found kind of through 23andMe, I was like, oh, like I am unique. I have my own fingerprint, whatever.
Mhm,
But now I suddenly like have similarities with not just like a sibling, but with like a bunch of people. And so that was really
mhm,
tough for me to like, I guess, just kind of wrestle with, and like
mhm,
a lesson that I've learned over and over that,
mhm,
yes, this might be a new way that you're thinking or acting, but it's probably normal out in the world.
mhm,
And so it was just a very humbling moment for me. And
mhm,
then the other thing was that I have um, my eye color is like not necessarily unique in my family, but it's green. And
mhm.
I like didn't, I was really convinced. I was like, oh my gosh, is this, I don't want that distinguishing feature from a donor. And I had a really rough time like not knowing where my eyes came from. That
Mm,
was really tough for me.
mhm. So you mean growing up?
No,
Or
just like when I found out, I was like,
oh,
oh,
okay.
like where, then whose eyes are these? It
Oh, wow.
was a
And
really big thing that it like just kind of fixated on for like a
really?
good 6 months. Yeah.
So neither parents had green eyes?
No. And green
Oh.
eyes are, they're not necessarily inheritable. They're like a jumblation of all types of pigmentation. So they're
Mhm.
just because you have a parent that's green eyes doesn't mean you will.
That's right.
But
Right.
in my head, I was like, well, then they're definitely not from my mom's side because, they're all blue and, or they're all brown. Like, and
Mm.
I don't know, it was just really upsetting to me that I had to look at this face every day and like not know a core component of it.
Did you think it came from a relative that had passed before you knew you were donor conceived?
No, it just never bothered me because I knew that green eyes weren't necessarily like I said, inheritable. So
Mm.
I was just like,
Mhm.
oh, cool. And yeah, my mom's eyes change color. So, who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah. And then do your half siblings or a lot in I know you have a database.
Mm,
Are there a lot of green eyes or hazel eyes?
yeah, I don't know
Mm.
what the actual like data is, but
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of people just with like different colored eyes. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
so that was like interesting. And then I saw the like the actual like not a rap sheet, but like basically like this is kind of the paper that you get shown of like what the donor would be like or his interests are or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I recently like saw that, and like that was actually really healing to me because I was like, oh, like a grandparent of mine had green eyes. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, cool. I just need to know where it comes from.
Mhm.
Again, even though it's not actually inheritable,
Mhm.
it was really, yeah,
No, that
healing for
makes
me to see
sense.
it.
I think there's a lot of that's a very common sentiment from people that don't
Hmm.
have are not living with a genetic relative or either adopted or donor conceived,
Yeah.
that they are wondering where their traits, the physical traits, came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something to do with identity development. I've tried to do my
Mm.
own speculation on why, but I
Hmm.
think that is just physical traits are something we also are socialized to put a lot of importance on as well.
Yeah.
So I think it is kind of like, and people talk about it. It's like really common small talk.
Yeah.
So yeah, so not having the answers is just makes some people feel a little bit alien. Like,
Right.
where did I get this? I don't know. It's like it help. It's hard to. So some people report that it makes them feel more connected when they can at least say, okay, I know I got it from this person.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go into detail about if it's a acquaintance or somebody you meet in the coffee shop. You don't have to say, well, I got it from
Yeah.
my biological father, and I am adopted, or I'm donor. You just say, yeah, my dad. That's
Yeah,
as far as you go.
exactly.
So, but if you don't know, then you kind of either go, I don't know, or you feel like you're lying, and that just feels weird. So I think to some
Mm-hmm.
people, but that makes sense.
And yeah, and thankfully, like everything else, I'm like a carbon copy of my mom. So whether
Yeah.
that was like a sweet blessing for a couple that wanted to keep this a secret, like that was just a really sweet gift they were given. And also like I never necessarily like wondered because I do look like my parents.
Okay.
So that was, yeah, I never had those thoughts.
Yeah. That
Mm.
helps. Do you have, and does your mom talk about this now? Is she open about donor conception now?
Well, it's a two-part. Like I wouldn't say that she's like advocating for it now and is like just had this big change of heart. It was the right choice for them. And so, I have family members that are going through this process or trying IVF and stuff. And for her, she can just empathize on a different level.
Mm-hmm.
And she's definitely someone, I don't think that she's necessarily shared her story as a component of that
Mm-hmm.
offering. But yeah, she's just a very like compassionate, empathetic person that's like, I'm here if you need to talk about it. It's really
Mm-hmm.
tough. Like, let's sit down and talk about it. Now, on my end, I'm just really transparent with her now about, I'm like, if I wasn't offered transparency on this, I am going to offer transparency moving forward
Oh, wow.
because
Yeah.
I
That's great.
want you to know
Uh-huh.
what I'm thinking. And
Wow.
because she had so much guilt and shame around it, like, I don't want to pick any of that up. Like,
Absolutely.
so I tell her and I show her, like, if the siblings meet up or um, if something comes up around health and stuff, or I had a brunch at my house with like a couple people that lived in the area, which is hilarious. I like moved to a new city and happened to have like 7 siblings in the same
Oh my
around us.
gosh. Wow.
So I was like, guys, just come over for brunch. It'll be so
Yeah.
great.
You have built-in friends everywhere you go.
Exactly. And for someone who likes to travel and I'm always like picking up people from couch surfing and stuff, I'm like, oh, this is amazing, actually.
Always have a place to stay, right?
Yeah, I know. So I tell her
Wow.
about that stuff because I'm like, I just want you to know where I'm at and that you should not feel, or I don't want to tell you how you should feel, but like, I want to show you that I am doing well and I'm navigating this. And when I have questions, I just am going to ask you
That's
because
great.
otherwise I just hate the feeling of resentment. And I know that I will build resentment if I do not become
Mm-hmm.
like ultra transparent. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where, and we're really close anyway, but
Good. And she's handling that well?
I mean, yes.
Okay.
Sometimes, tears come because she
Oh,
gets a wave of like, oh, I'm so sorry you're even having to deal with that or whatever. And I'm like, but it's okay. Like it's not because I'm not running away from it. I'm like facing it head on. So like, can we do it together? Like,
oh, that's fantastic that you're asking. And there may be times when she's still confronting her own shame.
yes.
So then you're like having to feel like a lot of then kids feel, and to their parents. I say kids, we're adults, I know, but
Mm-hmm.
we're still our parents' kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We feel like we have to then sort of come to the rescue and protect our
Right.
parents' feelings. And
Yep.
man, that can be a tough place to be in the middle right there.
Yeah. It's hard to have that role reversal.
Sure is.
But I have learned that, I can tell her, I can't force her. So I can be like, hey, there's moms groups for this. There are, when you're
Oh yeah, smart.
when you're the people that, a friend of mine is looking at maybe like surrogacy or some other options. And I'm like, mom, like this person, you can be very selective about this, but maybe it would be really nice for you to tell them your story because they're struggling, and it would, because you are so close to them too. Just think about it. You don't have to, but you don't know what kind of a impact you could have on someone now because you've walked through it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it's not like that stuff has come to fruition yet, but for both of us, the journey restarted last year. So it's going to take time, and we're kind of on our own healing tracks that tend to have like intersections at certain points, but
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, it's her own journey. And at the end of the day, it's my own.
Such a great point. Such a great point. And then knowing that line of what is hers and what is yours. And also recognizing it may not go on the same trajectory. And if it splits, and this is where it gets really tricky, if it splits, you start to see tension build amongst an adult parent and an adult, their adult children. And that's when you have that kind of dissonance. And that is an area that also can be dealt with. It's difficult, but you can learn to honor your story and your personal needs while accepting their place or their lack of ability to follow you on that path. And that's kind of the goal of attenuation or separation from our parents and differentiation. I'm gonna throw a bunch of shun words out there, but is that we can do that. We can accept the differences and that we may be in different places and we may grow further because of our own life experience, but that we can still respect and accept what they're capable of, and maybe still even foster a relationship if that's possible, as long as they're not harmful to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And and for better or worse, like this part of my like story, the narrative that I'm now building going into my 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, like I have control over now.
You sure do.
I didn't have control over the life that I was necessarily given, which no child does, FYI.
That's right.
But like, I can sure as hell make the most of it. Not to get like super sentimental about it. Like, people probably come on podcasts and they're like, I was, in a terrible accident, whatever. I'm living my own life. Yes. But this is every piece, trauma or healing or, exuberance. Like it's all little bricks, like I was saying, like little bricks that build your narrative.
Absolutely. And and healing, you get to have control over your own story. And I think that's what you said is so powerful, is by having that control, you can take on all of it, the healing, the pain, the anger, whatever comes up, and know that you ultimately have to do the work, which sucks, but that's just the truth. We all have to do our own work. We cannot, if we're pointing fingers, we're not going to be able to do our own work. So I don't want to gloss over it and say it's easy work, because it's not. It is challenging work, but there are people out there who have done it, who have, found the healing, found the acceptance, and, embraced that part of their story, and then also risen above their story, because we are more than our story too. So I think that's what's, respecting everybody in the stage they're in, whether that be, super angry and bitter and resentful or full of shame or completely fine with it. That's everyone's stage is different. So and that's and I think that's when it gets, this is a very complex topic. So we can't do that all or nothing. We can't black and white it. We can't be like, okay, you can't have that binary thinking, which is, it's hard for people, but
So I could have followed suit, right? And then been like, oh, cool. Like, this isn't something we talk about. Great. I'm not going to talk about it, and I'll just forget it.
So, and some
like,
people
there's
do
lots
that.
of options. There's lots of options in that. And again, it just depends on how you want to take the next steps. And when I'm thinking about, people's question of like when to tell kids, or does it just always exist? I know for myself, especially in my teen years, I probably would have used it against my dad. I don't know for sure, but I can imagine like that spitfire coming back and forth where, just teen years of, no, you can't control me sort of thing. I hope that I wouldn't have used it, but I'm glad I didn't have it as ammo. So that is one moment where I'm like reflecting back and I'm like, it would have been.
Yeah. Experts say that is the toughest time, developmentally speaking, to tell a child for the first time they were donor conceived. But if they know it, before then, prior to then in the preschool, middle school years, it's, you might have even experienced it being them yelling at you, I hate you, or you're not my real parent, because, kids do that
they'll do that regardless.
They'll do that kind of regardless if they're going to do that. If that's their personality and they're going to say, I hate
Yeah.
you, they're going to say, I hate you, or they're going to say, you're not my parent. But it's not necessarily, they're developmentally speaking, they don't really understand to a full extent what they're saying. And if anything, sometimes they're saying it to test you, to see as a parent, do you really love me as if I was biologically yours? You know, so we would definitely want to try to pass that test. I know my daughter tested me already, you know, when she was really little with that. Like, it was not easy. You kind of, you know, you have to like say what, you know, you've been taught and read to say, and you've read the parenting books, and then you kind of walk in the other room and go, oh, you know, and breathe out and just kind of take a moment to regroup yourself. But that's, it is our, ultimately it is us as parents. And that's my message is as the parent, it is our job to be the parent. And, you know, that's not always easy when we have big feelings around of shame, of grief, of sadness around topics like infertility. And, you know, it is, that's part of the work though. So yeah, I love that you're encouraging your mom to do it now. You know, it's never too late.
No, it's not, especially like, oh man, especially for women, like not being able to live in your truth. And it's not a chosen truth all the time, but yeah, the actual truth of what happened can be really impactful for years down the road, and it impacts your relationships, everything under the sun. And so you're right, it's never too late to like step back into this, like I say, like maybe it's like a brook of running water, right? It's clear, it's cleansing, like you've been running alongside it for so long, but like wash and get back in the brook and like let it lead you to where it's supposed to, the next intersection. So yes, it's never too late. I mean,
I love how
also never too late to tell, you know, to talk about that.
It's never too late. That's a great message. And I love how you visually explain.
I'm very visual.
Yeah, no, I'm too. I get it. You visually explain that in a way that, you know, when in the words that come to my mind are, if you're walking beside it, you're rejecting it. You're not accepting it as part of you. And so rather than reject that, allow it to come in, because your story is liberating. The truth of it is liberating, and it will, like you said, wash you clean and lead you places that you never thought possible. So you do stay sort of stuck when you're rejecting what is. So
exactly. And I think reflecting too on not just like my mother's role, but also my father's role. And for many men, right, like a measure of their machismo or their their identity is having children.
Yes.
And for my dad, he had children with a previous wife, so like for him maybe it was a little bit easier, but I could never, and I still could never, like say that, you know, he was just like, sure, I'll like have a kid, whatever. Like he chose, like when I'm thinking about natural conceiving versus choosing a donor, that word choose has been really highlighted to me. I don't have any tattoos, but if I were to, it would probably be that like chosen word, because it takes a very selfless person to like choose a child. And this could also, you know, this analogy could also work in like adoption too, but like you're choosing to take in something that you aren't blood related to, and
it's not
many
familiar.
kingdoms, in many kingdoms of the world, you know, there are stories of animals doing this, but it's not typical. Like if something doesn't smell right, you reject it.
Right, it's right. It's not instinctive. Yeah.
Right. And so every day, it's like when you get married, every day you have to choose that person. And so, you know, my dad was so involved in my life, like would go and sit in on classrooms to make sure the teacher is teaching me right. Like moments like
awesome.
that. I mean, my teachers were like, this is more stressful than the board members coming in. And I'm like, good.
Yeah.
I loved it. Well, I loved it, but I also was like, okay, I'm going to college now. You can't do that.
He was your protector for sure.
And so just that word chosen has really stood out to me this year when I think about, and I now work as a doula, so I work with clients that are having babies and, you know, going into their motherhood, fatherhood stage. And, you also have to choose your child when it comes out. You have to be like, okay, you're accepted into the fold. We're going to raise you and everything like that. But sometimes for donor conceived, it's another layer, because that baby arrives and you're like, okay, all right, we're doing it. Like, or you conceive, you finally conceive and you're like, okay, we're doing it. We're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's amazing to watch. There's an account, Pursuing Fatherhood, and he really speaks about that process. And you can see, now that he has his baby home, the change that's happened in him over this acceptance of different genetics. And he said recently, I almost look back at my old self and kind of think I was being a little silly, which of course he wasn't, because, he was being very honest about his feelings and about what's kind of instinctive and what's confusing. And, but he says now that he's like, I can't even imagine anybody but our child. And if you asked me if I could have my own genetics, go back and do it, I would tell you no, because my child is perfect and I'm so in love with her. So yeah, I think it's so wonderful to see that evolution. I'm sure your dad felt the same about you, and it just was
better.
It's just never a question. So, and that's why, again, I think it's so much of this shame and this stuff that we kept the secrets in place, where one, they were told to be secretive. Two, they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the language, they didn't have the skill set, it wasn't commonly known in society. So where we could, we could explain it to others. So, that's the goal of this work, is to get this out there so people understand it more. And it doesn't have to be a shameful topic, for your sake, for the kids' sake. You're the ones that, it is your story ultimately that you will live out longer than your parents in the most cases. And that is why the message should be, where shame and secrecy should be, kind of taken out of this narrative altogether.
Yeah. And like most things, I mean, if I can be really honest, I wasn't a huge supporter of like donor conceiving or even IVF. I was more in the camp of like, okay, well, if it's not happening and it's bringing a lot of sorrow and pain, then like, let's maybe look at other options. That was where I was coming from, as
like adoption,
someone who has never tried. Yeah. Like adoption. Yes. Or yeah. And so, but then as it becomes part of my story, and I'm like, oh, I literally cannot be fundamentally against this. Or else, like, then I'm going against my own life, and that is not natural for me. I would like to live. And so I think, reconciling those kind of beforehand, what I was led to think about, or my opinion on the subject when asked, was like, my knee-jerk reaction was, well, no, then there must be a reason. There must be a reason for that. But if I now look at what we kind of started the conversation with, which is biology is not able to keep up with the societal changes of what parents look like and how old they typically are now, then of course there needs to be different solutions. Of course there needs to be accepted solutions for those people who really do want to carry their child and have it at least be half biologically, at least theirs. So my opinions definitely changed on that, and I definitely talk about it differently with people when they kind of ask my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think you go back to like those large instincts that are in play that want that for someone to want to continue their genetic pool, for lack of a better word. That's probably wasn't.
And it's deep in us. We want to continue it.
It is, as humans, we are. So I know some times it can feel, people say, well, am I being selfish that I want to, choose to still have a child with my husband, even though I can't, my eggs aren't viable anymore. Is that selfish of me to want that? And, we had an episode recently with Tia, who's childless not by choice, after infertility. And we talk about that whole word selfish, and, how can we, isn't everything we do essentially selfish, right? I mean, aren't we self-motivated creatures? So, I mean, I don't know, it just ends up, if you call someone selfish, it seems very, like just a judgmental statement. So Trying to
I would
desensitize.
just ask, like, where does
Yeah.
that come from? Why do you believe
Yeah.
it's selfish first? And
We're
if it's
all
because
selfish,
you've
aren't
told,
we?
yeah,
Everything we do. And the fact that I had too many cups of coffee is selfish. It's what I wanted. You know what I mean? I adopted because I wanted to adopt. So it's not because it was some better decision. It was just what was right for me. And we have to respect individual choice and what is right for people, so long as they're not being, harmful about it, obviously. So,
right,
yeah.
right, absolutely. And it is someone's choice. You have to understand where some of your decisions come from too. Like, if you're fundamentally, like, for me, I was like, oh, I'm against this because I don't really know why. I think that's just what I've been hearing. And for me, I'm like, that's the quickest solution away from the pain of people who can't
Oh,
have a kid,
yeah.
is to choose another route quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, in a way, path of least resistance. But there's something really humbling and beautiful about people who are like, no, I know this is the right path for me. I believe it in my bones. I think, spiritual work and energy work is
Oh, for sure.
extremely
I'm
powerful.
glad you said that.
And so
Mm-hmm.
if you know this is the right choice for you, then you actually don't need to explain it away.
And that there's a lot to be said for that, I think if you have come into a family this way, whether through adoption or donor conception, um, you have the opportunity to have, kind of sit down with it and think deep and really explore this, do some research, do some reading, get into all the nitty gritty of it. And it takes time. That ultimately it does kind of come down to that,
Mm-hmm.
you get into that place of, and spirituality is not just necessarily, it's whatever you want it to be for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
It's not
religion.
religion
It's not,
necessarily. No.
it's just what is our purpose for being here? It's sort of meaning of
Yeah.
life stuff. So if you get into that, once you get into the meaning of life and purpose, and you can find and you can write your own meaning, and you can make it meaningful and useful. And the way I find, the best way I found, is by giving back and giving it and seeing that each of us in our story has a gift to
Mm-hmm.
give the world. And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of where you go back to your uniqueness and you really wanting to feel unique and being unique. And that is your uniqueness, is your
Mm-hmm.
unique story. Even if there's 70 half siblings, you still have a unique story and a life experience that's different from those 70 half siblings that you have to give.
Mm-hmm.
And something, finding it can be the hardest part, figuring out what exactly that is.
Mm-hmm.
But then, kind of that's how a lot of people end up making meaning from the grief and the sadness and the pain and the struggle they had to go through and the shame and, just all the heartache of it. Cause it can be a painful path.
Yeah.
So,
And all of those things that you're doing to have a child, hopefully you don't place all of that and go, great, baby's here, I'm placing it all on them. That
mm-mm.
all of that fear, all of that hope, everything, like, okay, it's them, and I
Yeah.
could just see how, like, doing that can also cause a lot of pain and discomfort, because your ideal child is going to make mistakes and will hurt you and will want to distance themselves from you, because
Mm-hmm.
that's how it works.
Mm-hmm. That exactly how it works.
Fortunately, we are called to leave the breast
We
by which we were
sure,
nourished.
exactly. From the moment they're born, it is a
And that's how you
task
know
of
you're doing a good
leaving.
job.
It's a task. The task is them leaving. And it is so hard as a parent. But yeah, there's so much in that. That's cool. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's just been such a pleasure to talk to you today. I
Yeah.
definitely appreciate your sense of, depth and thoughtfulness on this topic. And I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing it. So is there anything
Yeah.
else you'd like to share?
I think, like you were talking about, and this is a moment in history for me, and I might listen back on this podcast myself and go, who the heck was she? And, like, that is not where I'm at right now. And
Mhm.
so I think just highlighting and underscoring what you said previously around, like, yeah, this is how I'm feeling right now.
Mhm.
But I might
Exactly.
redefine this story to be something else
Mm.
later.
Mhm.
But as I go forward, I think transparency for me has been kind of the utmost importance. And then also knowing when to shut up. Like, not everyone needs to know, but when I feel
Mm.
this, like, quickening of my heart that I should speak, or I should say
Mhm.
something to someone, then
Mhm.
I should follow that, because my story will impact them in a
Mhm.
positive way. Otherwise, yeah, like I said, I don't need to someone be like, great eyes. And I'm like, cool. Yeah. Donor dad.
Yeah. You know, or though there might be that moment in time where it's something in your instinct tells you, your intuition tells you to do it. And then you don't, and right before you is someone else who is also donor conceived. And you know, your gut's telling you. I mean, there's just these, I mean,
there's
that's
so
just
many
so
missed
freaking
moments
cool,
like that.
right? But there's so many, it's not necessarily missed moment. I think your gut tells you when the right moment's right. I think it's a rare moment, but yeah, I think it's so true for people to know that just because you come on a podcast and you say something today, and it's so important for me to emphasize this for every single podcast guest that I have, that I'm speaking to them, and me included. This is how I feel in this moment in time, but I may change my mind in 2 years and have a different thing to say. So, because I'm continuously growing and learning and changing myself. So just to give everybody else permission to do the same, that we can always continue to grow and learn, and just, we have the right to change our mind. That doesn't make us less convicted. It just makes us flexible and adaptable. So I appreciate that you said that. And I think you'll listen back to yourself in several years and go, damn, I was smart.
That's always the goal.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to follow for more content, you can go to my Instagram and Facebook account at Jana Rupnow LPC, or follow 3 Makes Baby on Instagram. You can get a copy of my book and the companion workbook to 3 Makes Baby on Amazon. If you like this podcast, be sure to like and subscribe. Have a great day.